quick introduction, and then we can launch into it, all right? All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Tactical Debrief. As always, I am Joshua Joshi Howard. I'm joined here by Dr. Kyle McCord coming in off of a massive win at the American Team Championships. And Kyle, I believe you went undefeated at this event, right?
I did indeed.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. You went in, and the team that you went in was the Midwest Monstars, and you guys, from what I heard, Jensen, one of my good buddies, was telling me that you could have dropped your top scoring player in every single round, and you still would have won every single round.
Yeah. Without gloating, right? And I will say this, first of all, I'm really proud of my team, and we played against some really great competitors. We played against Rising Tide, we played against Tundra Tactics, we played against Pool Boys, a bunch of teams that I really and truly respect. Um, to give you some sense of the scope of it, there we played a total of 40 games among our 8 team members. We won 34.5 of them. Um, and the our average score per round was 115. So triple digits. And so typically, we were beating our opponents about 115 to about 35. And again, these were people who were real strong competitors. So very proud of my teammates, very proud of everyone who participated in the event. It was pretty incredible.
Yeah, and I think to give a little bit more context to that, because this was a teams event here, Kyle, winning 115 to 35, right? You normally go into a lot of these matchups where you have your 8 teammates, they have their 8 teammates, and you kind of expect like, hey, probably, Bobby and Johnny, they're going to go in. We're expecting them to lose, right? But
Yes, indeed.
like you go into it, it's like, well, Bobby and Johnny, if they're coming out with like big wins anyway, it's like that's just kind of the level of gamesmanship and the skill that you guys have demonstrated. But we brought you on today, Kyle, because you were the guard player on your team. And we know, or I know a little bit of the background from one of the other team members that you had, but you brought something that was incredibly durable. So do you have your list handy to go over?
I do, and I can recite it for you
Oh,
too.
let's go ahead.
Um, so, um, and I'm going to express some opinions, of course,
I
about
love
guard.
opinions.
I will tell you this: one of the things that I believe about 40K is that I can say, "Oh, I absolutely think this," and you can say, "No, I absolutely think this," and it's perfectly possible that both of us are right.
Mhm.
Um, but my view is that I don't think you leave home without Leo. So I had Leontus. Um, Leontus was attached to a Cadian squad, which was attached to a Cadian command squad. I wasn't often activating the +1 AP, so I wasn't really as worried about um, getting the one shot off with the mortar in order to activate that. I didn't have Creed or anything either.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was on my home objective. I had Gaunt's ghosts who were out camping, right, doing their thing. Um, I then had a tank commander with grand strategist, right? One of the things to say that we looked at for that is we thought really hard about whether the tank should have vect. And I actually think there's a pretty
Mm-hmm.
strong case that it perhaps should. And also I found it difficult to activate the grand strategist, but it was a tank commander with demolishers. The one thing I did that's a little different from other people is I wanted a little bit more long range firepower. So I had bolters on the side, las cannon,
Interesting.
HKM.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I'd do that again. Probably a mistake, but the fact that it's lethals was kind of handy. So I was like, just lots of shots, and then I'll take the extras.
Yeah.
Um, then I had uh, 18 Bullgryn. The Bullgryn were four of them. They all had mauls, of course. Four of them had the 4-up invuln. Two of them had the 4-up save and then an extra wound.
Oh,
So
interesting. Okay.
four brute shields, two slab shields. Um, and they marched up the board and hammered anything that got in the way, tied stuff up, all that kind of good stuff. Um, I then had a Leman Russ Executioner, so the one with the auto cannon to get extra AP.
Oh, Exterminator.
That
Yeah,
was
yeah,
also, yeah, that
yeah.
was also sporting bolters on the side, so heavy bolters. And then Dorn, followed up with a Dorn, followed up with another Dorn. Uh, we refer the name of the list was Dirty Dorns Done Dirt Cheap.
Nice.
Um, and when it used to have two Dorns, it was called the KFC Double Dorn. But basically, and I arm them slightly different people. I keep the oppressor cannon. I do the pulverizer. I pack as many stubbers on it as I possibly can.
Mhm.
Um, and the reason I do that is it's great for stuff like Catan. If you want to put a Catan in the ground, having 18 lethal shots that potentially just put them on, make them take 4-ups is actually pretty good. And so I think that I would probably change that in retrospect, but at the time it was a pretty good strategy. So basically, Dorn, tank commander, auto cannon, Russ, Gaunt's Ghost, Leo, 18 Bullgryn was the whole of the list.
Yeah, I mean that sounds like a very durable list, if nothing else. You have so many 2-up saves. You have a bunch of the 4-up invulns. Now I want to dig in a little bit because I know your team. You're expecting to play at a very high level, and the conventional wisdom for most players is you just take 6 brute shields on your Bullgrin. So what was it that you were doing that you decided you wanted those 2 slab shields?
Um, my yeah, there is a wisdom to that, and there's a case to be made for it. Um, our plan for the list was, and this gets into some of the team dynamics. Um, we, after playing at NATC, which is the event that happens annually in Tennessee, Chattanooga, um, we decided that Tau on table 5 was absolutely bananas. And so everyone had largely figured that out. And so one of the ways we decided to deal with that was to create 2 lists that Tau did not want to play into. And one of those lists was guard.
Hmm.
And so the most of the time my opponents would just decline to play my list if they were Tau. I did play it once,
Hmm.
but what that gets to is a brute shield. If you're being shot by a riptide, doesn't always end up being ideal because you take 4 damage, um, and you have to make one of the 6-ups or you lose a guy. And I'm not great at the 50-50 of making 6-ups
Hmm.
because it's 50-50 because you got 3 wounds. So we said, okay, let's give 2 of them 4 wounds, and then they can just soak some of that, right? They will take 2 shots from a riptide in order to kill one, and they may get unlucky, and they just don't do it anyway. Um, and so that was sort of the game plan there.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's a really interesting point, right? Because one of the things that oftentimes prey on Bullgrin is anything that does damage 4, because even with a -1 damage, that's all of the wounds. But if it's damage 4 and now you have 4 wounds, 3 wounds is going to take 2 shots. So that's a really cool little tech piece that you guys thought of, especially if you're intentionally targeting one matchup all the time. But naturally, Kyle, this is teams. It sounds like you wanted to play into Tau quite a bit, but you don't always have that. Sometimes, like you said, the Tau player's like, nope, I don't want to play that guy. So you find yourself playing on table 5 sometimes. But what was the other tables, or what was the other goal if you didn't get the Tau matchup?
Yeah. So they were my we were looking to put my list into things that it generally could bulldoze. And so I sometimes ended up playing matches that I just didn't want to. Like I played in my last round into triple Catan, not something I'm necessarily looking for because they can make a lot of 4-ups and life just gets difficult, right?
Hmm.
Um, but I didn't really want to play that. But we played it on a board where I had a lot of openings to shoot out. He had 2 Doomsday Arcs. Again, a Doomsday Arc is another target that has trouble with Bullgryn if you go up to 4 wounds, right? Um, and then, so I ended up playing against that in the last round. I played against an Astra Militarum mirror where obviously they had a lot of 3 damage weapons, which then goes down to 2, and then sometimes you make one of your 6-ups, and the math gets weird.
Yeah.
Um, I ended up playing against, oh gosh, 2 other things that I will think of as soon as I look at this.
Hmm.
Um, I played in rounds 1 and 2. let's take a look. Oh, right, different one. Past. I played against things that obviously were super memorable because I completely forgot them. All right, here we go.
There we
In
go.
round one, I played into Grey Knights. Grey Knights is not necessarily a preferred matchup for guard, and I eked it out for an 11-9. And then in round two, I played against um, I played against.
Oh, hold on. My cat wants out of the room. But go
Oh
ahead.
no! Uh,
Hi, Oscar.
in that round, I played against Chaos Knights and won 19-1.
Oh, that's a pretty big win there.
Yeah, me and my opponent talked about it, and he said, if I move out, you're going to shoot me to death. I said, that's right. And he thought about it for a minute. He's like, well, at a certain point, I have to move out. I said, that's also right. And then he did that. And then in a shocking turn of events, I shot him to death.
I can't believe you do that. You had to, I always tell them,
Uh,
it's like, I intend not to shoot you, and they move out, just crossing the fingers a little bit. But
sure.
yeah. But I mean, it sounds like you've come up with this very difficult to kill list for a lot of armies. So let's go ahead. Before we talk about the exact theory for your list and the games that you actually played, I want to talk a little bit about the terrain because I know you guys were playing all on Pariah Nexus terrain. We have 8 different terrains. In particular, number 5 is generally a bit problematic, like you said, because Tau and any shooting army is there. But there's also, I want to say table 7 is the other one where
Table 7 is Melee World.
yeah. So I'm kind of curious then, what was the holistic strategy that your team had with these two tables in particular in mind?
Table 5 was our trap table. If there was no list you could put into us on table 5 that was not going to have a bad day. And so if they were going to defend on 5, we wanted to make sure they had something they didn't want. With table 7, generally our plan was to use an army that was basically a blocker army, or alternatively, we had an incredibly infuriating Eldari list that had moving and shooting Wraith Guard. It had tons of lone ops. It had lots of things that just made life frustrating. Um, we had what we called the Towiest Tau, which was just every single gun we could find, and we would use that as well. And so we had basically very hard skewed lists that were meant to thwart particular matchups.
Gotcha. How many of these different SKU lists were you guys actually bringing?
Our Tau was incredibly Towy. Um, our guard was very, very shooty. But again, also it had the Bullgryn stopper, so it was very durable. We had uh, what I think has been well documented at this point, a very frustrating Eldari to deal with. We also had a Blood Angels pure send list that we could use to put into stuff like elves.
Hmm.
And then we had like 2 to 3 fairly balanced lists. We had like a sisters list that would be kind of what you would expect. We had a NIDS list that would be kind of what you expect. We had you know, uh,
Death
a
Guard.
Necrons list
Yeah.
that was skewed, but again, it was hypercrypt, and so if you played against hypercrypt, you'd have some idea what you were getting into.
Sure.
Um, and then we had Death Guard, that was Jensen's list, and that was right down the middle.
Yeah. Well, makes a lot of sense. So let's go ahead and talk about your games a little bit. I know you said your first 2 games not super memorable, going into the Grey Knights and then the Chaos Knights. But is there anything in those games that you felt was particularly instructive, even if it's during the pairings or during the game?
Sure. A couple of things to tell you. So with Grey Knights, you should pretty much just assume that you can't stop them from doing a secret mission, unless you are playing 10 infiltrators on Marines, or your guard and you're like, I'll take all the regimental advisors, right? Even then, generally speaking, it's very hard to keep them from just on the last turn, especially if they're going second, dropping a squad of strikes in your deployment zone. Um, Grey Knight weapons are not good in 2 guard,
Yeah.
generally speaking. My opponent made a ton of 4-ups, an unbelievable number of 4-ups. And so, in order for Grey Knights to kill guard vehicles, they have to get in melee with you. You can make that more difficult by saving a blank or something on a Dorn and being like, okay, I'm going to zero out one of these. And then you're lethal into their vehicles. The most dangerous thing that Grey Knights bring is not in the Grey Knights Codex, it's Canis.
Oh yeah.
And so this was not going on in my matchup. The other thing that's annoying is I couldn't put the army into uh, Grey Knights with the big the guy who ignores modifiers, right?
Hmm.
Can't do that because he'll straight kill Bullgryn,
Yeah.
right? You can't so you can't reduce the damage number. It's the same reason that I really did not want to play into Silent King. Silent King is miserable because you can't blink a save, you can't reduce damage. It's really strong into guard. Um, so he made a lot of 4-ups. He got his secret mission off. The mission, I believe, was I'm not. It's not coming to me, but uh, that's what I'd say is that you have to respect Grey Knight's melee. You don't have to respect their shooting because they don't get rerolls, they don't get lethals, and so it's very difficult for them to actually damage the tanks. Um, Chaos Knights can do actual damage if you let them get close enough. Typically, it takes a carnivore or it takes a brigand with Melta in order to kill a vehicle. They're not going to get a million shots at it. But the other thing is they don't outrange you. You know, one of the great virtues of guard is that you can, if you build the list right, you can generally shoot people from the cheap seats, unless you're trying to get in there with demolishers. And so what I really did was uh, Chaos Knights always has a few more units than you think they should.
Hmm.
They always have a few more baby knights than you think is really realistically possible. And so I sort of played back, used the Bullgryn to take objectives. When they came out to deal with the Bullgryn, which is actually not all that easy for them, because the best, the chain cannons are maybe going to kill one if they're lucky, because they're hitting on twos, wounding on fours, you're saving on fours, and then getting rid of wounds on sixes.
Hmm.
And then, nobody wants to put a thermal lance into a Bullgryn squad. And so I just knew that I had basically better weaponry lined up. I kept my back safe. And one of the things that the list was designed to do is you don't spend your CP on strats, you just use it to burn through cards. You
Mm-hmm.
should be cycling basically every turn if you don't like what you get.
Cool. I mean, that makes a lot of sense, especially in a teams format where you're playing for the differential more than just the win, right? I feel like in a singles game in Chaos Knights, you're just like, well, I'm just going to outscore you. It doesn't matter if it's by 1 or by 40, but when you're playing as teams, you absolutely care about that every single time. So, makes a lot of sense in my head. But it sounds like these first two, so the Grey Knights was a pretty close game. Like you said, it's hard to stop them from doing secret missions. The Chaos Knights game was not close at all. What about the third game?
Yeah, so my third game was into, let me make sure I know exactly which one it was. Game three was into, yeah, it was into Tau, my
Hmm.
friend David Clark.
Nice.
So this is an interesting one. So um, we played on a very open table, and Tau went first. In his turn, he using seeker missiles and a couple of uh, broadsides was able to kill a Dorn, which not many armies can do. That's actually pretty difficult to do on turn one in my deployment zone.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, yeah, so he moved everything up. Um, my crackback was that I killed like 9 out of 10 Pathfinders. I killed a Breacher squad and the character with them. I killed a uh, I killed a Skyray, and then I killed a Devilfish. and moved the Bullgryn up onto objectives. And then he had to spend basically a turn and a half trying to remove the Bullgryn before they charged at him. Oh, I killed two piranhas too. I forgot about that.
That's a lot.
I killed quite yeah, I killed quite a bit. And so uh, the one of the things that happened that was annoying was that he iced most of my squad of Cadians who were sitting on the back objective. And so I was like, you know what, man? Leo and that guy, I'm probably not going to have orders very long anyway. So Leo and the squad are just going to run out and start stabbing people to death, which is what they did. They stabbed a bunch of breachers, then they stabbed a pathfinder, and then in the course of the game, they stabbed two broadsides to death.
Wow.
So Leo and Constantine were on a murder spree, is the theme of that game. Um, Eventually, he ran out of units before I did. And so I use that as an opportunity to push up very hard, force him off objectives. But it does tell you that if Tau gets to go first, there's not a lot you can do. It is the case that if they have an aggressive pile of guns, it can be really difficult to deal with. And I don't mean railguns. Railguns are actually really bad into my list.
Yeah.
It's ion that actually does a lot of damage. And so um, you know, I hate shooting at riptides. Feel like riptides make like 75% of their saves for some reason. Mostly the way I killed them was by getting in range with meltas and then just doing, big chunks of damage all at once.
Yeah.
And I ended the game with, again, Leo and the gang had punched through. I'd done some sticky objectives. Um, and it really came down to I had two Dorns that he could not kill, um, and that sort of did him in.
Yeah, I feel like that's a pretty common theme in, whenever you're playing a list that has Dorns and it's like at some point they could not kill another one and then you just kind of take control of the board. But so you've gotten 3 wins so far. What about our fourth game?
In our fourth game, I played on, and this one they put me on table 4,
Hmm.
and I played against another guard player. Uh, the mission was um, the mission was it was I think it was Jay, um,
Is that
and
Linchpin?
so it was Linchpin,
Yeah.
and so I used Gaunts to hold down one of the objectives, and then moved Bullgryn around and onto the middle objective, and kind of dared him to come out. Um, Poor Derek, who was the guy who was piling it, had some bad luck, man. I shot at his he shot at a Dorn that I had put out. He put autocannon Russ into it. He did extra AP from Ursula Creed. So he was +2 AP. He hit me with a Hellhound, so I had no cover. So I was effectively -3 AP.
Hmm.
I had smoked. His whole army shooting at me put the Dorn down to 6.
Oh, jeez.
At which point it emerged from the smoke and did all but 2 wounds to a Dorn. The Bullgryn used grenades to kill another Dorn, and then the one Bullgryn that had survived pinned an Executioner to the wall, an Executioner autocannon tank. It tried to desperate escape, rolled a 1, re-rolled it, got a 2, and died.
Oh, I
And
feel for Derek right now. Like that just sounds like a nightmare as a guard player. You put your
I
entire army to
also
one
made
thing
it
that lives. Yeah.
I also made an 11-inch charge with the Bullgryn into a squad that had gotten out of a Chimera. So I just, yeah, I openly said, well, that wasn't supposed to work, right? So he took it like a true champion. He had 2 Dorns. I killed both with grenades off the Bullgryn. Um, and just got in his deployment zone. I used Gaunt's Ghost to go kill off a squad of Catachans that wouldn't die. And then, he scored a couple points at the end to, again, when you're in a team tournament, you're trying to scrap for every single point. That's what he did. He did a good job of it.
Nice. Yeah, so I'm actually really curious then. What did you have the guard mirror as in your matrix in this one?
15.
15? Wow. And then what did you actually score?
Uh, well, it was an 18-2.
So above matrix.
So
That's really good.
yeah, I think it would have been a 15-5 if I hadn't made that charge, right?
Sure.
Um, he ended up he had a big Scion squad, the big command squad with 10 guys. He had to basically drop it in his backfield to defend against the Bullgryn that were just encroaching on him. And between that and the desperate escape test and a couple other things, he played it generally very wisely. Um, the generally speaking, my experience in the guard mirror is that whoever has more guns wins. And I had more guns. So I figured I would probably win.
Makes a lot of sense. Well, you're currently 4-0, and that leaves us one last game. So how'd your last one go?
So this was interesting. This was on the single worst mission
Uh-oh.
in Pariah, which is supply drop. Um,
I was worried you were going to say
I have
unexploded ordnance. I was like, there's no way we had that in a team tournament.
supply drop is somehow worse.
Really? Oh, man.
So
Okay.
yeah, I have an incredible knack for losing every single pregame die roll. Um, I I played this mission at Worlds against Richard Siegler, and uh, his objective did not disappear. Mine did disappear, and then the middle one disappeared earlier than that. I also lost the roll off where I wanted to go second,
Yep.
so it was like disastrous. This was not quite so bad. It was against a Necron list that had Void Dragon, uh, the green Catan that warps around,
Hmm.
um, and then Nightbringer. Then it had Doomsday Arc, a couple of like miscellaneous squads, and then unfortunately for me, it had the destroyers that have the 8 million shots at 7-1/1.
Yeah.
Um, that squad is incredibly annoying for guard. Um, oh boy.
Mm.
So my son is here
Oh.
visiting. All right, so uh the uh what happened was I was like, okay, that's a squad I need to be really concerned about, the heavy destroyers. And so one thing to know about supply drop that my opponent did not know is that your backfield is utterly irrelevant. You should completely ignore your backfield. You should jam everything on the three central objectives, and block your opponent out. And so I went first and put all my Bullgryn into the middle. I picked up a couple of Tomb Blades, right? And I just got cards. I focused on getting cards that were going to matter. My primary score was 10, 10, 10, 10, 8, 15. My opponent's primary score was 0, 0, 5. And then on the last turn, he got 35 points
Oh.
because he got a secret mission that he successfully completed. And I failed all Overwatch with Adorn 2 turns in a row. I got 0 hits. And so he got to claim the middle objective. He did also goof up a little bit and allow me to pile in with the Bullgryn. Here's the thing that's interesting. Catan are really bad at dealing with Bullgryn, because you can sweep or you can slap, but either one is kind of bad, because I get 4 ups. I actually charged Bullgryn into the Nightbringer just to buy myself a turn, and they basically the Nightbringer didn't do anything for 2 turns, and then he appeared in my backfield and killed my tank commander, and I didn't care.
Yeah.
Right. They also killed. He used the enigmatic destroyers, the heavy destroyers, to kill all of Leo's squad. I didn't care about that either. It meant I couldn't issue orders anymore, but I spent most of the game just killing stuff that was on the middle, in terms of objectives. Gaunt managed to heroically survive being shot out by a bunch of different things charged in and immediately died, which actually ended up costing me a strangely large number of points.
Uh-oh.
I love Gaunt's Ghost. You can't use it for anything. You have to just use it as a camper, I figured out.
Hmm.
Um, the unit itself just doesn't do any reliable damage of any sort. But as a unit that scores points and is OC 12 lone op, it's fantastic.
Yeah. Oh, sounds like someone's having a good time in the background there. Do you need a moment?
Augie, can you come say hi? You want to wave? Wave at the computer.
Hello.
A young guard player in the making.
Ah, that's what we love to hear. So overall, then it sounds like you had a very successful event. You went 5-0, even in some matchups that maybe should not have gone as well. I'm kind of curious then. So, firstly, if you were to take the same list but make a few tweaks to it, are there any changes that you would make if you were to go back and rerun the event again?
Yeah. I would do two scout sentinels instead of ghosts.
Okay.
And then I would um, I would basically cut the Cadians down to just being like, an infantry squad and get rid of Grand Strategist. The reason is because nobody bothers to shoot at the Scout Sentinels anyway. And so, generally speaking, they can hold that objective without too much trouble. Um, I just found that Gaunt didn't do anything. The Scout Sentinels, to be clear, won't do anything either, but there's two of them. And that
Fair.
would have been helpful. And sometimes you do want to just be like, this thing has to die. And you have to get very close range to do it. But if you just are like, okay, that's within 18, everybody's going to reroll ones to wound or ones to hit. Cool. That's good. You're also digging for lethals anyway.
Yeah.
Um, I very I spent some time considering the ponies, a big unit of ponies that comes back. In our previous team setup, we'd had pretty good luck with that. Still think about that.
Hmm.
I liked the ponies. I thought, but the problem is there. This is a abs put start everything on the board, go at your opponent and see what they can do about it. That's not what ponies do. A
True.
big unit of ponies drops in, ingresses on 2 or 3, mashes something into oblivion that's worth more than 120 points, gets killed, comes back, does it again, right?
Yeah.
Um, and it's a big point sink in terms of like CP. So if I were playing a different role on the team, I would think about ponies.
Yeah. Makes a lot of sense. Well, then the next question then is, so we know what you would change if you were to do this in the teams event. How do you feel like your list ports over to singles, and what changes would you consider making in that environment?
You could almost play it the same way. I might go down to 2 Dorns just to free up some points for mission play. I would not stop playing 18 Bullgryn. That was bananas. Like most people just straight up can't deal with it. And they have to spend a whole turn dealing with them. And in the meantime, what you do is you shoot them a lot.
Mm.
Um, I think that you would maybe want there are lots of things that conventional wisdom suggests you might take. If you're looking to do a more balanced list, I would look at what Nassim Foshen took to Worlds. I really liked that list.
Yeah.
Again, it's fairly light on guns. If you got into a matchup where you're going to go into a shootout, that could be tough. But the actual like core of the list, all of the like units that he took, I thought were good picks.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually had him on fairly recently, and he was just like, "Yeah, I think I would probably take the almost the exact same list and go directly into singles." He's been playtesting, but we'll see what he ends up doing with that. But it's exciting to hear that the teams list. That's what I've been hearing from a lot of players. So you, Nassim, and then David Purcell, who's also had a lot of success in teams recently.
Yeah.
Um, everybody's been like, "Yeah, guard list, you just take the good things, and you just once you have the good things, it all comes through." Now, the first question I kind of want to ask and dig in a little bit is there's an ongoing discussion, which I think, like you said at the very beginning, I can say one thing, you can say another thing. It's possible we're both right. There's a very big division in the guard community over how good a Dorn is. So, I want to hear
Sure.
your defense of why you think a Dorn, or like maybe 3 Dorns instead of, say, 4 or 5 Leman Russes.
Sure. I have always been a Dorn man. I will say that since that model came out. Um, Here's the case for it, and I would not argue in any way that Adorn, like that there's a case that you should only ever take Adorn.
Hmm.
I don't think that argument exists, right? Um, Here's what I like about it. I like guns that can shoot people from a long distance away. Dorns have that. If you get close, they can make you miserable because they pack multi-meltas, right? Additionally, um, the if you have a limited number of orders to give, they're very efficient because you don't have to issue to a bunch of different tanks all at once. If I were going to build a Russ build, probably what I would do is tons of the autocannon tanks and tons of regular Leman Russes. My problem with that build is the same problem that I have with CSM Raiders, which is CSM Raiders has such a strong ability until your opponent walks off the objective, right?
Mm-hmm.
But Adorn doesn't care where you are; it would like to shoot you no matter what. Um, I will also say that I liked have so you have a place to stack your orders that's really strong. Additionally, guard thrives on using defensive buffs to stop your opponent from doing what they want to. You can stack all of those on a single vehicle. So I mentioned that point in the game where I was against guard, and I was like, you know what, man, I'm gonna put -1 damage on this Dorn. I'm going to put -1 to hit. And then my opponent spent the whole turn shooting at that one Dorn because it was the only one he could see and did 12 wounds to it. Right now, bear in mind, I had some good dice fortune,
Sure.
but still, I quite like the whole DB's, Dragon Ball Z, everything shoots at something and they're like, and then the smoke is revealed and it's still
It's still
there,
there.
it's still there. Um, because one of the things that I figured out in terms of how to play 40K is that if your opponent has a unit that they say that unit absolutely has to go. If it doesn't go, I think my plan falls apart. If you make it so they cannot actually remove that unit, most of the time people just fold in on themselves. A good player will come up with an alternative plan, but even a good player will tend to be taken aback when they can't do the thing they want to,
Yeah.
right? Um, and so if you can create an impediment uh, that really does that, that's great. And so again, I would not argue that it's like Dorn or the highway, but I'll say that it fits with my ultimate desire in terms of what I want to do. And we originally built a list with 3 Dorns, and my friend Jack Harpster was like, "No, dude, another Dorn, just more Dorn." Just keep putting Dorns in, and when there's no more Dorns to put in, that's when you stop. And it turns out he was right about that.
Nice. Yeah, I know you guys. So you flew my buddy Jensen in from Singapore, and you also got Jack Harpster from Art of War to join you guys. Sounds like
Yeah,
everything went well. But I do want to zero in on something that you kind of touched on, where, like you said, the DBZ, they put everything in to something that's still alive. And, on our side, we're the defender for that. It's just like, yeah, we win the game. But on the other side, it's soul crushing when you put your entire
it is.
army into something and it's still there. And, as a guard player, sometimes we're on the other side of that, right? Like sometimes there's like a monolith or like a land raider. We'll put our entire army. We just can't stop rolling ones and twos, right? We just can't hit it. And then you're just like, it's such a morale crusher. So it's always such a big deal whenever something like that, goes in your favor. But
Well,
awesome.
and yeah, and that is one of the things that I will say I found to be absolutely true about Guard, and it is one of the reasons that it is not the thing that I play for singles at the moment. Is that often you do in a lot of conventional Guard armies, you have one phase to get it right.
Yeah.
Um, and so that becomes difficult. And one of the things I would encourage guard players to do is to look for things where you aren't confined that way. Ponies do that. Bullgryn with grenades do that. Don't count on Bullgryn to do damage. That's a wild and crazy dream, right?
Yeah.
That like almost never happens.
They'll kill
What
Marines,
they
and that's
are
about it.
is yeah, if you're lucky, right? And then because if you're like, oh, I hit on threes and I wound on threes, it's like, yeah, enjoy your four wounds, right? That go through, right? And then they'll save half of them, right?
Yep.
That's just Bullgryn math. But like what they do is create another thing that your opponent's like, holy crap, I can't get rid of this, and it's so annoying. And then they get stuck behind, and then they have to desperate escape, and they lose a tank, right? Um, Bullgryn do that. Um, you move blocking chimeras do that. Uh, Units of troops getting out stealing objectives does that. Um, Other phases you can interact with. I always think that there it's nice to have some things like assassins that again move you out of the shooting phase. The other thing I'd say is this, and I know this isn't a question we asked, but I guess I'm answering it anyway. One of the one of the things that I often see guard players do is they get very focused on that shooting phase. It has to go a particular way, and maybe your opponent's designed a list where it's like, I can't easily deal with that, right? Um, in that case, what you have to do is, let's say you get halfway through your shooting phase and you're like, oh crap, this is not going to go my way. If you keep the course, you you unless things swing back, you're just going to stay where you are.
Yeah.
So what you have to do is pause, give yourself a second, and see if there's another way out of this. Okay, maybe there's some other plan B coming into this turn that I can work with. Maybe I can charge this. Maybe I can move block this. Don't get hung up on the thing you couldn't kill. Think about the moves you still have available, that might make for a successful plan B, and build in units that have a good plan B for you to work from.
Yeah, I really like that a lot. I think by moving us into the charge and fight phase and just having those options, it gives us the ability to, like you said, like, oh, that didn't work. How can I still solve it? And if you don't have anything that does anything to fight phase, well, the answer is you don't. But now with the Bullgryn and the ponies, we have more options. Now, I kind of want to get in. You said something about the Marines, and we'll get back into that because I know that Kyle, you were a recent hopeful for the Team USA at the WTC. You got into the interview process. So can you tell us a little bit about what that process is like as someone who unfortunately didn't make it this year?
Sure. Yeah, so more or less, I put in my application and I gave them, and you write an essay about what you'd like to do. It's not necessarily an essay, but it's something like that. And so in my in my info, I expressed, how much I enjoyed, being part of an international community. I talked a little bit about what I valued about the game more than just, it's always satisfying when your opponent shoots at the door. But I will also say, I included a lot of information about what is happening outside the context of that game. The guy who I played, by the way, who was the guard player who had such a rough day, we added each other on Discord. We had a really good conversation. I was cheering for their team all the way through to the end, right?
Awesome. Yeah.
Because he actually gave me some really great ideas about guard too. He was like, do this, do this. I was like, awesome, right? You can win a game and still have someone teach you plenty about it, and you can lose a game and definitely um, have great insights that you can share with your opponent, right?
Yeah.
And so I talked a lot about how I saw that, how I saw community building. Um, and then what happened was I had an interview with Sean Naden. Sean and I talked a little bit, and so we had a Zoom conversation in the evening after his kids went to bed, my kids went to bed, and just talked about what we loved about 40K, and a little bit about where I was as a player at that point, and then talked a little bit about what I'd be interested in terms of roles for the team. And then, there were lots. I saw the roster. of people who he was picking from, and all of them I was like, oh, I like that guy, and oh yeah, that's my friend, and so they were all people who I really respected, and um, he picked a good roster of folks. I was a hopeful, I believe, the year before
Mm-hmm.
last, and then this year I didn't apply because um, I looked at the kind of, and this is not a statement of value one way or the other, but I looked at the amount of prep that was going into it. And I've got like a 6-year-old and a 2-year-old, and I was like, it realistically is not going to happen. And so that kind of kept me from applying this year, was
Gotcha.
that I
Yeah.
wanted to not take time away from my family that I would otherwise want to.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I know, I'm trying to remember who did the interview, but someone did an interview recently, and they were saying the amount of work it requires to win the WTC in particular is at the point where it's not fun anymore. And especially if you have these family obligations, if you have social or work obligations, not everybody is capable of doing that. So I have a lot of respect to just say, hey, this is not for me this year. Maybe we can explore it again later on. But I know there's also one other thing that I've heard that there's a lot of talented players in the Midwest. And would you like to speak to that at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the current WTC format has some great players, right? I think Eric Forsman is an excellent Midwestern player. Andrew Gagno. Um, One of the things that we have going on is what's called the LMC conference. The LMC conference stands for the Lord Marshall Conference. If you haven't seen it, you should go check it out. Big props to Nate Martin and Jason Horn who run that. Um, the players who are in the LMC, a lot of those are what make up the Midwest Monstars.
Hmm.
And so, players like Ryan Verbeck is at the top of the list right now. David Clark, me, and then we've got other folks who were at the event, Ben Sherwin, Dan Salmons, that's Peyton Priest, a lot of folks just off the top of my head, Chris Green, right, was at
Yeah.
the event. Um, and these are players who I think are supremely gifted. And one of the things that happens, and I don't say this in a disparaging way, but because a lot of the folks who are currently uh, running the WTC team are from the coast, they don't always get to see some of these folks in action. So, what I would say is, if you're out there, WTC people, make sure you keep an open mind about Midwestern folks. And this is not, singing my praises or anything, but, because like I said, I haven't had time to really think about
Sure.
playing
Yeah.
in that environment anyway. But I think there's a ton of great WTC talent. Like, Trainer was on the team this year and didn't see play. Trainer Wolf. Trainer Wolf is a very good player, very excellent player, and would love to see him on the tabletop. I know we only get to play 8 guys, but I'd love to see him playing on the tables and all that kind of good stuff.
Yeah.
I think he's a heck of a player.
Yeah. I think it's really cool as well. They kind of talk about how there's a lot of coastal players, but it's hard because I know there's a big scene in Texas. There's some very strong players there. There's a bunch of good players in the Midwest. And it kind of makes me a little bit jealous of countries like France or like England, where
Sure.
it's the size of California. You don't necessarily want to drive from one side from LA to San Francisco, but you can, right? And so the same kind of thing is a lot harder here in the United States. So maybe multiple USA teams in the future. Crossing the fingers. It's an idea. Anyway, so
I'd love to see it. I'd
yeah,
love to see it.
with all that, then let's talk a little bit about the guard things a little bit because you said you're not playing guard in singles so much right now. What are you playing instead?
Uh, well, I was playing Dark Templar or Black Templars for a bit. I played Black Templars at Worlds, and had a great time playing them. Um, I am still guard at heart, though, guys. I love something that shoots. I
Yeah,
don't want to play an army that doesn't shoot, and so currently I'm playing Dark Angels, and I went 501 in my last event and took second.
nice.
And my Dark Angels departs a bit from what John Lennon does in that I really still like the Redeemer.
Hmm.
Um, and I have a pet unit that not everybody is such a big fan of, which is the Gladiator Valiant.
I don't even know what
Um,
that does.
yeah, let me tell you, Gladiator Valiant it has two sponsons that are both multi meltas. It has a stubber, which if you're playing Black Templars is just another multi-melta, so it gets 6 multi-melta shots. And then it has a anti-fly gun that it uses. The main gun is what a lot of people sleep on. People feel like the Lancer is very consistent. I'm not a big fan. Um, but instead, what a Valiant does is it has a 2-shot last talent. The last talent hits monsters and vehicles with +1 to hit, so it hits on twos, and then it is twin linked at d6 +1, strength 10. Um, where a Lancer might come in and say, "Oh, I shot you with my 2 big guns. Uh-oh, you made your 2 4-ups." The Valiant comes in and says, "I'm going to shoot you with my big gun on top. Oh, you made your 4-ups. Enjoy 4 more multi-melta saves." Um, it's really good in a mirror into Deathwing Knights.
Yeah.
And it does something similar to the guard list in that it has Azrael, and Azrael lets you just cycle, right? You're just like, okay, cool. I'm going to find the cards that I want so that I don't have to necessarily deep strike or do things that I don't want to. And so it's very consistent on secondaries. If you have anything, if even if you're not a guard player, whatever army you're playing, um, one of the strongest mechanics right now is being able to search your deck functionally by just cycling cards without having no CP to play your game, right?
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I've been playing that. Would I play the Guardian singles? Yeah, I definitely would. I am finishing out my season because I'm at the top of the rankings right now for Black Templars and LMC. And if I do well, or if I win the next event, I would finish as the LMC champion. Fingers crossed, right?
Yeah. Good luck.
And so I'm going to play the strongest version of Dark Angels that I can. I love DWK in the same way that I love Bullgryn. And then the rest of the army is really built around cycling, shooting, um, again, activating all your phases. One of the things I'll say that I missed when I played guard was I was like, "Where's Oath, man? Like just shoot at something and never miss, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm just gonna re-roll everything, right?" And with with Marines, you can be like, "Okay, I'm gonna auto hit you with all these flamers that are bananas," and then. The single strongest unit in the game, and I go on record as saying this, is the Eradicator brick in Gladius with the Apothecary Biologus with Fire Discipline.
Yep.
That that unit is straight cracked. Because you're like, okay, let's roll. It looks like I got 3 hits. Okay, I'm gonna hand you 6 wounds. What? Right? Like none of that makes sense. And then you are like, okay, cool. I'll go. You're going to move towards me. I'll just go ahead and get back in. Right? The Redemptor is so punishing. And then the Eradicators come out. They pick up 2, 3 vehicles. It's not even all that unlikely. If you don't kill them, or you get too close, or you screw up, they get back in the vehicle, and then the thing overwatches you. Um, is miserable, right? If you're a guard player, kill that thing. Kill
Yeah.
that right away. There are great guns to kill that unit, but by golly, if it looks at your Russes, I don't know how many Russes are looking at it, but there's going to be a lot fewer the next turn after they activate. Also, don't try to move because they will overwatch you immediately, reroll all hits, all wounds, all damage, auto wound on sixes, and if they get 2 or 3 of them, they'll just auto kill you, and it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine. I'm not surprised. Like the Eradicator bricks with the fire discipline and everything, absolutely nuts. So hopefully, I'm hoping you get your wins. Then after that, let's see maybe a few fewer of them going into world champs. But they are absolutely disgusting. So you did say that you are a guard player at heart. So what would it? One of the
Indeed.
things that we did here earlier today was, and for this will be several days in the past for everyone who is watching this later. Um, Art of War was saying that Guard is the most underrated faction in the entire game, and I know you wanted to say a few words about that.
Yeah. So one of the niceties of my of being part of Art of War is that I call Jack and we just chat, right? And
Yeah.
so Jack and I are longtime friends at this point, and so we actually had a discussion earlier today. What would guard look like? Um, and I said I agree with you. The um, absolutely guard, especially in teams. Um, I think the variant of guard, my variant of guard that I think is really strong. I think Nassim's version is really strong. I think the version that puts 18 Bullgryn on the table, that puts a bunch of tanks in front of your opponent, and then just says, "What are you gonna do about it?" Um, is very hard to answer, because any of the guns that you would use to kill the tanks are the same things you would use to kill the Bullgryn. Um, and so, generally speaking, if you can do that, life gets very difficult for your opponent. I think that um, I think that guard players, I think a lot of times I'll say this, and this is true of every strata of players. I do think it's especially true for guard players. We tend to have that unit that we love, that we're like, man, that has to be in the list. That I really like this, or I really like this, or perhaps we're envisioning the list in a particular way. Um, I think a variant of guard that scores points is really good. I think a variant of guard that goes, this is a hammer, I'm going to smash you with it, right? What would you like to do about it? Okay, you're going to come out and shoot me. I'm going to shoot you back way harder. Okay, you're going to come out and try and melee me. Here's a giant pile of idiots who are -1 damage, who have a 4-up invuln. Let's see how many I make. And then, by the way, they're going to back off and I'm going to shoot you. Right. And then anything else you'd like to try, I will also shoot you. Right. I think that list is is in the very top tiers, and I think a lot of times if you have mitigation of damage, you pilot it, intelligently, where you block out your back. Um, I think it's just very hard to deal with in any meaningful way. I know that as a Marine player, I would not want to play that. I don't think there's an easy answer to it, and a lot of times you end up scrapping for points in a way that is just very, very hard to deal with.
Yeah, I can imagine. I'm bringing actually a fairly similar list. I guess it's just like sprawled out on the ground right now because I was making sure everything was painted, so I don't have to do it for this
Nice.
weekend. But double Thorns, 18 Bullgryn. We'll see how it goes. It's been a good
I
time.
think it's a good time.
Yeah,
It's a legitimately fun army to play too.
yeah. I'm looking forward to it. I went 4-2 at my last event, so hopefully, if I win
Nice.
this one, I can get my golden ticket. Are you going to be at World Champs actually this year?
I sure am.
Nice.
Absolutely. I was blessed to take eighth last year, so I just got to come back right away.
Oh, that's awesome.
At the team event, we got a single golden ticket for the whole team, and so our I'll be hanging out there with our coach, Chris Adams, who is just an incredible coach, and then I'm going to be hanging out with Jack. So you'll probably see the three of us around.
Awesome. Any chance you're going to be playing guard there?
Possible, quite
Possible.
possible.
It all depends on
Quite,
what the data slate looks like, right?
I don't think the data slate is going to be bad for guard. Let's put it that way, right? I'm doubtful that it looks bad. At which point, I would very much explore it. And again, I'm finishing out a season with Marines, and then I'm always open to possibilities. Especially once the guard book comes out and we get a sense of what individual units can do. I'll be really excited to see what kind of play styles we can get out of that. That might be really interesting.
Awesome. Well, I want to be respectful of your time, so I'm going to end with a couple of hot takes coming from you here, Kyle. The first one, I always
Sure.
start with this one. What unit in the guard index is the most overrated in the community?
Hang on. Um, I am not a huge fan. I'm not a huge fan of chimeras.
Okay. Why not?
Um, for all the things that they do, uh, they often end up going on suicide missions that don't produce points and they give up points to your opponent. Um, Chans in a Chimera is a strong points efficient unit that very often amounts to nothing because almost all of its guns are AP1 or AP0. So for all of the shooting that it puts out for 130, I can usually buy something better.
I mean, that makes sense to me. And then we're going to flip it. Could you give me 2 units in the index that you think people should be taking another look at?
If people aren't already looking at the Dorn, they should be looking at the Dorn.
I think the community has accepted, like, it's probably pretty good at this point.
It's probably pretty good.
Yeah.
If I were to look at the guard book,
Mhm.
um, here, I'm going to take a quick look. That way I am making an informed
We love
decision.
informed
Uh,
decisions.
if you're not looking at a 10 man of Rough Riders, I think you should be. Um, I also still think 20 Deathcore with a Psyker is incredibly obnoxious. Um, 20 Deathcore with a Psyker, uh, if your opponent doesn't have something that just kills infantry, is super duper strong, right? And so you're having a 4 up, bringing guys back, potentially doing more, and then on 2 CP coming back, I think is super duper strong. I'm going to withdraw my statement on the previous thing. You know what? Chimeras are all right. I will say that the unit that I think people are super hot on, that I am not so hot on, is the big Scion squad.
Oh, interesting.
Um,
That is a hot take.
I talked to my guard opponent about this, and I said, "How often does this thing actually do damage?" And it does a lot of damage. Don't get me wrong, um, and it is somewhat difficult to remove, but it also is like a fairly straightforward attack unit that your opponent can zone out. So often, if they're smart, they're going to give you inoptimal targets for it, and then you're just relying on the shooting phase to hopefully go better than you think it's going to. It also puts you in a position where you give your opponent assassinate if you drop it and they happen to draw that. Um, so even though you can drop it and then bring it back and do it again, I'd rather do it with ponies because ponies put out a huge amount of fire. They move really fast. They're awkward to move, but they often create a kind of problem that is unique. And man, Melta I like Melta a lot. And so it speaks to my desire to melt things with a lance.
I love it. Very succinct. This is what the doctorate in creative writing is coming in for. I love it. All right. Before I let you go, then, because I want to make sure you have time to visit with your son and everything, is there any other shout outs or anything else you'd like to give a couple words on before I let you go?
Yeah, no, shout out to my team. Such a fantastic group of players. It's always so wonderful when you can just rely on your the partners that you're working with to come through, and their hours of dedication that we put into this. Shout out to all the organizers, people making tournaments happen. As someone who helps with that, but I'm not always the main person, your tireless efforts do not go unappreciated. They're really valued. And to everyone out there trying to make guard work, making guard work, being imminently successful with guard, no matter where you're at in the process, keep doing it. The more you play the army, the more you play the game, the brighter you're going to get at it. And then shout out to all my homies at Art of War who, keep making amazing content and were generous enough to include me. So super appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much to everybody that you said, the TOs, all the good homies. It's been awesome. And thank you, of course, to you, Kyle, for coming on. For now, though, this is going to be the end of our episode. So we're going to go ahead and see you guys all next time.